My name is Jim Koepnick, and I'm a Sigma ambassador. I have been an aviation photographer for about 40 years. And what I want to do with this is give you some tips. I changed the title of this from what you may have seen in some of the promotional emails, just to get a little more specific, because I want to give you tips and ideas and inspiration. Some of the tips are just, a keynote slide with them written down. But hopefully the last two, the ideas and the inspiration, I love going through Instagram every day and just getting ideas and looking at good photography. And, I can look at something and I don't want to copy it per se, but I want to take some of the elements and go, if I put my style on this and if I apply it to this subject over here, I wonder what it's going to look like. So I'm hoping you're going to do some of that. I'm hoping that the pictures inspire you, even if it is in aviation, to take that idea and use it for your own creation. Now, aviation photography, to most of my friends, is just what the cover picture was. It's the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds. It's the jet teams. It's airplanes that are blowing smoke, as I call it. And the thing is, even after doing this as long as I have, there are so many more aspects. And some of this comes into place in that I'm a photographer for Plane and Pilot magazine and Flying magazine. And in doing an article, we have to not only do the air-to-air pictures or the really dramatic, the action shots, but there are the detail shots, the cockpit, the people, pictures that kind of set the scene a little bit. There's such a variety. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about. Is it's not just the air show. Depending on what your interest is and what your gear is, what your budget is, because I have to face that myself. There are so many things you can do if you go to a local air show or even go to your local airport. If you have friends there or can make friends there, there are some great things to shoot. But let's use air shows because it's opening up this year. There are going to be air shows across the country, and it's going to be a great way to go out and take pictures. But it isn't just the planes that are flying during what they call the air show, per se. There's cockpits, which I think it's one of my favorite ones. There are feature pictures. I'm a newspaper photographer, and I love shooting feature pictures, just anything that captures my imagination. There are portraits, and this is one of my favorite ones too. How can you capture somebody and show some of the airplane or some of the elements without it being boring, having a little life to it? There are fireworks. So many shows now are doing a night air show or just fireworks afterwards. And it's exciting. It's really cool to watch. And it's even more fun, I think, personally, to photograph. They're just the airplanes on the ground as you get, walk into an air show. You're usually surrounded by them. So there are a lot of subjects and targets you can shoot. And air to air, which is probably the ultimate, the most sophisticated part of aviation photography because of the money and the safety and the people involved in it. So let's look at these. And again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. If it's on a picture that's within these different sections, I'll try to answer it right away. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end. But I tend to look at these presentations maybe a little less as a presentation and more as trying to, give you some good tools, some good tips, something that will make you have more fun and take better pictures. So that's my goal is that. So the more we talk and exchange, the better I think it will be. So let's start off with airplanes, because when you walk into a fly-in, that's what you're going to see first. You're going to see a lot of times they've got military planes on display. There are a lot of small airplanes. So what do I do when I go to a fly-in? I noticed that somebody was here from Duluth. and they've got a great fly-in up there. I've been there a couple of times, hoping to go this year because they've planned it in June again. And I love that. So Duluth is I'm trying to think of, we had to park in the regular parking, and I probably had to walk in a mile, or maybe it was a little less, but it was quite a trek in. So what am I taking if I have to go to something like this? Well, here's 4 choices or 4 options that I have. I love the Sigma 100 to 400. It's a great lens in itself, especially for walking around because it's small and light. But if you have a crop sensor camera, it's going to give you the equivalent of a 150 to 600. So that's pretty cool. The Sigma 150 to 600 is kind of a standard now in the airshow field of photography with people that go to a lot of air shows because it's got a great price. It's fairly small and light, and it's really sharp. I've settled on the 60 to 600 sport lens right now. And if you see me around doing just about anything that has fast action and I need a telephoto, it's going to be this lens because it's a little bit bigger maybe than the 150 to 600, but it just feels smaller, doesn't seem that heavy, and it's got such an incredible range, and it's so sharp. And the 70-200 sport, to me, the 70-200 is always a standard lens to have. So I'm not going to carry all 4 of these in. Right now, if I were going to a show this weekend, I'd take the 60 to 600, but I might have some of the other ones in the car just in case I want an option for something. All right. All right, why am I picking all? Did you notice I'm picking all long lenses for that? The longer focal lengths for me reduce the field of view and help eliminate distractions. So with all these people around, and they've got ropes around the airplanes with flags on them and poles up and so many things, that telephoto lens lets me sort of visually crop out all that stuff and reduce all the distractions so that I can concentrate on the subject that I've picked. You'll notice some of these things follow through with a lot of the different sections because these are what work for me. And it's a good point to make right now is this is what I do. This is what I take to a fly-in, or if I'm doing any kind of aviation job. I can't say do this. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know your budgets and your equipment and all the other things that factor into why you have what you have and shoot what you shoot. But this is what I found works, and it works for me. So hopefully you can use some of that information and apply it to your own and find a Sigma lens that works for you. All right, so here's one of the reasons I love telephotos when I'm just walking around and shooting airplanes, because I can zoom in, really compress the image. These are 2 airplanes side by side. I can see the action. I always like to put a person in the picture if I can. So I can see that, have a focal point, and then be surrounded by this color that may also be dropping off in focus a little bit, like the airplane in the back, so that it brings your eye to that person kneeling. I love, zooming out, zooming in, I guess it would be, and trying to just isolate different features on the airplanes in the ground. And in this case, I think it was a FedEx plane behind this. And I just love the difference between the two. I love the colors and the compression. There are so many cool things you can do with just showing people and airplanes and how big this was. I just posted this on Facebook for another picture, but because I was a newspaper photographer to start out with, we were always taught when you go into an assignment, shoot wide, medium, and tight, and shoot horizontal and vertical. And you want that wide picture to establish, where you're at, what this event looks like. So even with 100, 400 millimeter lens, you can see the metadata on this one, that I'm still backed off far enough that we can see, hundreds of people and airplanes and know that we're at fly-in. My settings, and yes, Mike.
I didn't want to miss this question from earlier. I thought you might show fireworks later, but someone asked, how did you get the fireworks so sharp? And I want to second to that what you said a moment ago as the 100 to 400 lens. I went to my first air show and I found that to be surprisingly the most useful lens because everything was much closer than I expected when I went.
Good point. And we will get to fireworks. That's toward the end of this. I'm going to tell you some of the settings that other people ask, like why do you do this, or what have you got your camera set? And I will say that I have gone through all the different manufacturers of cameras. I was shooting Canon 1DXs and 5D Mark IIIs, and then I went to Nikon and shooting D500s and D5s and D750s, and then Sony, and I'm kind of doing a little bit of Sony and a lot more Canon R5 and R6 right now. But you could be doing this, you can get good pictures with a Canon Rebel. You just have to have the right settings and be in the right place, and just, wait for the moment. The moment is something, I think I mentioned that a little bit later on too, is there's a moment that I think we're all trying to capture no matter what you're shooting, and that moment is really important to me. And because of that, I use aperture value exposure. And I know there are people that say, oh, you should only use manual. I want to shoot fast. The action is going on, not just with airplanes in the sky, but people on the ground. And there are those moments that can get away from me. And I'm not really let down very much by aperture value. It works for me. It gives me the correct exposure. I just make sure I set the ISO high enough to give me a hand-holdable shutter speed. And I'm not talking a 60th of a second because I'm using those longer lenses. I want to be at least a 500th of a second or 1,000. So I might be 400, 800, 1600 with the Sony A9 Mark II or the Canon R6. I really don't have a problem on a cloudy day walking around shooting 1600 ISO. And I know it's going to give me sharp pictures without that much noise. And I've always been happy with the images. And I do servo autofocus on everything. I'm going to add this afterwards, is I use back button focus on everything. As a sports photographer and aviation, I just find it works out the best to be able to turn focus on and off with my thumb. So my finger is just working the shutter. So moving on, while we're still on the ground looking at airplanes, Mike just said how great the 100-400 is for walking around. And I love this shot because it almost looks like a painting where everybody is doing something different. I'm square on, it's got this very two-dimensional feel to it. But here's an idea, and I like that I did this on the same setup here in front of the vintage hangar, is I don't usually use a monopod for taking pictures, but in this case, I use it as a pole to put the camera on. And I put on my 14-24 and put it on the pole. And you pretty much put it on, the easiest way is put it on timer and focus on the ground where you think you're going to be. High f-stop is going to give you plenty of depth of field. And excuse me, put it up in the air and let it go off and take a look. And you may have to recompose a little bit and do that 3 or 4 times until you've got a composition you like. I know Sony's got an app. Everyone has an app that'll go to your phone. But the problem I found at major fly-ins, and this was taken at Oshkosh, is that there is so much radio interference and Wi-Fi and everything else in the area that most of the time my app does not work right. So I've learned as a backup just to do it the old-fashioned way and put it up, let it click off, and then come down and look at the picture on the back and make changes as needed. But 14-24, yes, I do take other lenses along. The advantage I have, and so I'm sorry, I have a cat coming down here. This is going to be one of those Zoom things. where the cat comes in, but I'm not gonna put her up here. But it's one of those things where I have the advantage where I can drive in closer in Oshkosh where I park, so I can keep a full variety of all my signal in the trunk. So if I know this is a shot I want to do, I'll go back and get it and walk back to the place.
Can we do
And
a
then maybe
swap?
pardon?
Traffic.
And then maybe I'll shoot with that 14 to 24 for a while just to see what it gives me. And then I'll go back to the car at some point, swap lenses out, and go back out and try something else. To show you ideas too that, you know, especially if you're not into airplanes flying or, you know, you have a different interest in photography. This is just a long exposure. This is one where I did carry a tripod for this shot specifically. And I wanted to show this is a new airplane, and I wanted to show all the people milling about it and show the interest in it. This was for a magazine picture. So I just used slow shutter speed and just varied that shutter speed and looked at the image in the back until it gave me just enough blur that I thought I had my composition.
Hi, Jim.
Question, Mike?
Yeah, well, that was one of the questions on an earlier shot. Are you handheld, or do you prefer tripod or monopod? I imagine it varies, but do you have a preference that you normally work with?
I am almost always handheld. The monopod is only for those pole shots, and really, and I know there are people that do monopods for air shows, and I'd probably kill you if you're in front of me if I'm moving my camera up and down and that monopod comes out and hits you in the back. So I've learned the hard way that for some reason, personally, I cannot use a monopod. Even shooting football or something like that, it impedes the way I shoot. And I'm fast and I'm always looking different directions, and just doesn't work for me. Tripod, perfect in this shot, perfect for fireworks, and perfect if you want to do something you know, early morning, late in the afternoon, and you want to depth the field, or you want to make those little points of light stars, you know, little street lights or whatever they have, security lights, and you're looking for that effect. But outside of that, I just handhold them as a tripod or anything like that for your show.
We're getting a lot of questions about teleconverters in the mix, and do you use them? And I'll kind of answer one here. Is the question is on the 60 to 600, is the 1.4 or the 2 times teleconverter recommended? I think normally we would recommend the 1.4 times converter, as it is, so you're going to lose a full f-stop. But I'm wondering if you had any experience on the 60 to 600 and teleconverters.
I have just been playing with it because actually I don't want to you know, go off the track too much here, but Sigma Tech Rock Mark Farb had just texted me and said he was trying the 2X on the 150 to 600 on a Canon R6, and he was getting great results. You know, he's just kind of playing around with it. So he asked what I was doing, and so that got me trying the 1.4 a little, and I am definitely going out. I believe it's March 26th. I just saw it this morning that there's an eclipse of the moon and another blood moon, I think. So I will have it at my 60 to 600 out with the 1.4 on for that. In general, though, I don't use them. I'll pretty much use the lens only because I just kind of do that, I guess. I don't need that extra reach as much as I want to keep the f-stop sometimes. And I've just, for some reason, I've just never been that much of a teleconverter guy for action.
And have you noticed any loss of sharpness with the 1.4 converter at all versus no converter? Some would say, I haven't personally, but.
No, and I don't think I have either.
And I get another question from Lens. When do you need credentials and when don't you?
Good question. And these are the kind of things that I never thought of putting this in the presentation, but everybody, I shouldn't say everybody thinks they need credentials, but a lot of places credentials will get you access that the regular public can't go to. But that is not always the best. At Oshkosh, everybody thought it was so cool they could go from Airshow Center and go out in front to shoot the airplanes. But you're almost, I won't say totally underneath them, but your shot is looking up at them. And the angle just isn't that great sometimes unless they're in a bank. And in fact, I'll point it out when we get to it later in the presentation. Some shots that even from farther back, you have a much better angle on things. You know, rule of thumb is it's nice to have the press credentials because they usually give you a pass for the event. This is my take on it. So I don't have to buy a pass to get in. But it doesn't give me that much more access. About all it does sometimes is give you a free lunch. And I'm being a little flip and funny about that, but it's cool to have it, especially at the events where it does actually help you get in somewhere. But I think you can take great pictures just from watching what's going on and picking a location that's going to work for you.
And you mentioned back button focus earlier. Someone's asking, how are you using that to take action shots? As sometimes it's easier with single shots versus continuous high shots, or are you able to set that up where you are using back button focus and getting continuous high shots?
I use it for everything, and I started back, man, like 30 years ago or more. Somebody from the Canon team, when EA was sponsored by Canon, showed us how to do it. And it takes a little getting used to it, but once you get used to it, I can't think of going back to the front shutter button. It gives you more control because you can turn focus on and off with your thumb, and you don't have to worry about with your shutter finger, I'm going halfway down to focus, and then all of a sudden you press a little too hard and you just took, 6 pictures or something of something you didn't want. It's easier to lock it in focus and recompose. It's easier to move your focus point over and lock it in. For me, it is. I'd suggest that go on YouTube and look for some of the videos that explain how it works, why it works, and why a lot of people like it, especially wildlife and action photographers. And give it a try. It's something that takes a little getting used to, but I, for one, just think it's a really good way to do it.
And I'll let you proceed. Last question, just one more here. Are you using cropped or full frame camera, and do you utilize drone photography, or do you shoot RC models?
I don't shoot RC model. Oh, I have for an assignment now and then. And it's really interesting because, as you look at it in your camera, it looks like it's a regular airplane up there. I was at an air show and they were doing, in fact, one of the air show pilots, someone had an RC plane that looked exactly like his, and the two were doing like a little formation flying. And it was really bizarre to watch. But outside of those occasional assignments, I don't do that. What were the other questions? Oh, full frame. Everything I shoot is full frame. A lot of that is because I'm a personal opinion, and I may be corrected by someone more technically, or more knowledgeable than I am in this, but I shoot a lot of sports, and a lot of it is high ISO, and I've always been under the impression full frame gives you better noise or less noise. So that's kind of why I've done that. And I've always shot have shot the top tier cameras, and those are all full frame. So, it's just something that I started with. When we started out, especially with digital, we shot everything. There were actually 3 formats. Canon Pro had, what was it, APCH or something. They had one that was like 1.4 or something, and regular crop sensor is 1.5 or 1.6. I've just ended up sticking with full frame just because it works for me.
Thank you.
All right, we're still talking airplanes in the ground. As photographers, we look for the golden hour, or early morning, late afternoon, or early evening, for that beautiful light and what it can do. And what's really cool is what it can do to an airplane. And um, and you just going out and playing with light. And one other thing is, don't be afraid to use flash. This, I think, was like 3 flash units. This was a magazine picture that I was working on, and it was a brand new airplane 2 years ago, and I wanted something dramatic that no one else would have. So we decided to put it on the runway with the sun going down and just see what we get with the clouds and lighting the airplane. Now, moving on, pretty close to what we're at is feature. Walking around looking at airplanes, pretty much the same lens choices. And why? Same reason. I like the reduced field of view because it eliminates distractions. And I'm still a newspaper photographer at heart. It's easier for me to capture those candid images without interfering with the moment. And those moments are what I'm looking for. Like my friend and his girlfriend walking to his airplane at sunset. This is waiting for the night air show at Oshkosh. Again, I'm going to be an aperture value. I manually set the ISO. And again, with those longer lenses, I'm going to set my ISO as high as I need to get, at least 500th of a second, maybe 1,000. You'll look at pictures and think they're sharp until you get them on the computer at 100%. And then you go, oh, maybe I should have bumped that shutter speed up a little, because people are moving as well as you, and you got to keep that into consideration. And I generally shoot wide open to start with so I can separate the subject from the background. And a good example being this: we were at a little hangar party before Oshkosh started a couple of years ago, and 2 little girls from that belonged to one of the pilots, they walked away and wanted to look at the airplanes that were in the field. And it was just quick, pull the camera up and shoot. And I like the fact that the planes are out of focus in the background. Same with this. A lot of distraction in the background with people watching the air show. And this little boy's got his balsa airplane, and he's kind of flying with the pilot. And I just love dropping the background out for a shot like that. In this case, I probably did the opposite. I don't have an f-stop here, but I'm guessing it was f16 because I've got that starburst starting with the sun. And I wanted to silhouette him. I wanted that feeling of early morning. He's taking the dew, got a chamois, taking the dew off the wings of his plane. And this is a friend of mine that had just taxied in, first time he had ever flown in as a pilot to Oshkosh. He had been there for years, but he had just got his pilot's license, so he was pretty excited about this. Now, what does this shot give us that is one of my favorites, and that's portraits. They can be candid. And what is my lens choice? And I'm not trying to be too funny here, but seriously, it's any lens in your bag. You can take an interesting portrait. And I'm going to start this off with that because you've noticed that I've been on these long telephotos for so much. But I did this, actually it was for Sigma, trying to show what the 28mm art lens would do. So here's a very wide lens, and I think it's a really cool portrait. I like the look on her face. And the nice thing that a wide angle lens does in a portrait is it lets you capture some of the background. You have the environment, so you know she's in an airplane. And it keeps the foreground so sharp, but it'll still let the background drop off. And I think the one mistake that I've seen a lot of people make with a wide angle lens is they just center everything and shoot wide with it and just think, well, this is just going to get everything in the picture. But for me, when I shoot wide, I want to be close and put them off center so that I can do a shot like this where I have some interest in the foreground and then it drops off into whatever the environment is in the back. This was a friend of mine. She was just starting to learn how to fly, so it's just a pose shot. She's all excited, and it has the elements that are needed, I think. The airplane, the headset, the things that say, aviation and pilot, as well as her enthusiasm. This was just a candid shot. He was getting ready to fly. He was telling someone, I think he actually got hand propped, and he was all set to go. And I yelled, "Have a good flight," or something. He turned and smiled, and I was ready and just snapped that one. And if you knew this guy, he's quite the character. I'm sure that the old leather hat he has is probably original from somebody from the 20s or the 30s. But he is, he's like a Renaissance man to me when it comes to antique aviation. My settings are aperture value again, because I want to drop that background out. Same thing with ISO. I'm going to pick what I need manually. I don't like auto ISO. I've tried it a few times, and I just find at times it bumps it higher than I really want. So, but again, I want to separate the subject from the background, so I prefer to start out wide open. Now, this is one, again, this was an assignment I did for Sigma. And you've seen all these I want to say exotic Sigma lenses, all these big telephoto zooms that I love shooting with because they're so good. This is our 18-300. I'm trying to think of the cost. Is it $400 and some? It's not very expensive, but it's one of the most versatile little zooms that I've ever had. And I love taking it when I travel. And it was a good chance for me I wanted to get a portrait of this girl in a Piper Cub. And it was a great chance to use this lens. I'm inside a hangar, but it still does a terrific job. It's sharp as can be. It's small, it's light, and it's very, very versatile. Question, Mike?
Jim, just a couple questions.
Yeah.
And that 18-300 is $100 off right now. It's $479. But a couple questions for if you're shooting a plane nose on, do you still shoot wide open?
It depends on if it's on the ground. And I'll give you a very honest answer here. Yes, I shoot wide open, and I always tend to look at my pictures after I shoot them, and then I'll think like, wow, I need a little more depth of field on that. So then I will pick, 5.6 or f8 or 11, something like that. And I may reshoot it so I have a little more depth of field. I make mistakes too, and I do a lot of stuff the hard way.
And do you shoot video along with stills?
I don't. It's happens, and then I'll go for a bunch of assignments where it doesn't. And generally, I don't. It's probably something I should do a little more of, but with the people I'm working with, they have their own video people usually, so I let them do their thing and I do mine.
And we're getting one more question from earlier. This person shoots shutter priority for action sports, and are they doing it wrong? They're asking.
No, I will go into some of that when we get into the air show airplanes, but it's really whatever works for you. And my thinking on it, and let's take football instead of airplanes, is if I'm shooting with, and now I'm off the top of my head, can't think of what the 60-600 is. Well, at 600, it's 6.3, correct? At 6.3. That's going to give me the most blurred out background as I'm going to get. If the player is pretty close to me, it does blur it out pretty much at 6.3. It's pretty cool to think that at that f-stop, it'll do that. But if I pick shutter priority, if I do that, I'm going to be at least 1,000th of a second and maybe 2,000. It varies in there. I hate to go below 1,000. So if it's at night or inside, I'm not going to go any lower than 1,000. If I'm outside, 2,000, 3,000. I was shooting track at 4,000 and 5,000 this weekend when I could, just so I could really freeze moments. But when I do that, it's going to vary my aperture. So if my I love being at 6.3 because that's going to blur the background out as much as possible, because it's wide open. But if I pick my shutter speed, depending on the light, that can move from 6.3 to 8 to 11, depending on what my ISO is. So I don't like the fact that I can't control my depth of field. So that's why I pick aperture. And I just keep an eye on the shutter speed. And in most cases with sports, unless there's a lot of clouds moving in and out of the sun, or you're at that point where the lights are on in the field, but there's still some ambient. I'll shoot manual with a lot of that too, um, just because I want that f-stop as wide open as possible. Hope I explained that, but I don't, I I want to be able to separate the background if possible. So that's why picking aperture gives me that. And as long as I'm over 1,000 on shutter speed, I can be anywhere from 1,000 to 6,000 to 8,000, and I don't care because I froze the action. But I still have that wide open for shallower depth of field if possible.
And do you shoot RAW, JPEG, or both?
Good question. All of this aviation photography you're seeing was shot raw because that gives me the most to work with in post-production. And that is one element I didn't add in here yet, is post-production is very important to me. Just the editing, you'll find things that you didn't realize that you had, these little gems that are going to be there that you're going to find in post-production, and cropping to get the best picture. And raw is always going to be the best for that. But a lot of the sports I shoot is JPEG because it's a quick turnover and it's easier. And depending on the camera, it's going to do better clearing the buffer. Sony has some problems. The A9 Mark II is not the best at clearing the buffer, even in JPEG. So if I were shooting even an air show, I might consider shooting an air show plane going by if I had my A9 Mark II in JPEG, only because I'm going to get more pictures before the buffer is full and I can't shoot.
And I noticed you're shooting with the A9, and one of the attendees, Michael, asked, isn't the 18-300 for the crop sensor camera only? Technically, yes, it was designed for the crop sensor only, but what were you working with, the MC11 adapter?
On the MC11 adapter, and the nice thing about Sony, and I'm trying to think in Nikon.
I think even the new R Canon will also.
Yeah, you're right. That will too. Is they will take a crop sensor lens and you can run it on a full frame body. The Sony has you can manually do it, or it'll just auto do it when you put the camera on, and you don't even know the difference. So that's the cool thing about mirrorless, is that you can do that. So in this case, an 18-300 crop sensor lens is perfect on a full frame body.
And a couple more questions. What's the maximum ISO that you shoot at? And aside to that, is you're mentioning shutter speeds of 1/2000 or 1/4000 outside, but looking at the metadata on some of these shots, this one included, you're at 1/200th of a second. So how do you do this handheld with those lenses so well?
Well, some of those high shutter speeds I'm talking about are in sports. If I'm trying to shoot football or soccer or baseball or something like that, I want that really high shutter speed. If I'm walking around shooting feature pictures at the air show, what you're seeing in the metadata, falls into place pretty good. I've got optical stabilization turned on. All those lenses have it, all the long telephoto zooms. So it's really good. And the other thing is like, well, in this picture, this is pretty controlled because I'm inside a hangar and she's posing. So at 1/200th of a second, that's going to work okay. She's not moving. But I might find that 1/200 or 1/250th outside, if somebody's moving, isn't going to work. And that's when I should start bumping it up a little bit. I can't find the words for what I'm trying to say with it. It varies. It varies with what I just shot. I've always gotten questioned in presentations sometimes because you always see a winger in my metadata, and it's like, why did you shoot at 8,000 ISO? That doesn't make any sense because you're outside. Well, it's because I was shooting into a dark doorway or something if I'm doing street photography, and that's what I needed to get the picture. But then all of a sudden something happens right behind me and I turn and shoot, and I'm not going to worry about changing settings because I want to capture that moment. So sometimes, you know, I do what I do. That's probably a poor explanation, but you know, I'm human, and sometimes I forget to change my ISO and make it up or down. Uh, like I said, I'm more concerned with that moment. And
Kathleen D asked just now here, did you use a flash for this particular shot on the screen? And if not, or if so, what types of units do you use for lighting stuff?
this one I did not use flash. This one of the things I like about shooting people is the fact that if they're in a hangar, you've got this huge door that's open, and the hangar's all in shade. So you've got light coming from the front, this big wall of soft light, and it just makes for beautiful portraits if you work it right. So this is just, most of these are available light. I've got I've got 6 Godox units actually, all set up with transmitters that work on Canon and Sony. So that airplane that you saw a few frames back, so that I can light a car or an airplane and have multiple flash units and have it all work via radio signal. And the different transmitters, it's kind of cool that it works that way. The Godox strobes are all Sony mode, but I'm not using the hot shoe, I'm using the radio trigger. So it doesn't matter if I have a Canon trigger on a Canon, it's still going to send a radio signal and make all the strobes pop right. So I find that kind of cool to these electronics.
Do you have problems at airfields shooting things that use radio frequencies like that?
No, I haven't yet. Let's put it that way. I haven't had any interference with things. If I have any problems, you know, and I talk about that, this is how I do it, and I make mistakes. And I remember I had a model at dawn, and I had her get up at 4:30, and we're trying to shoot this early morning light with a building behind her, and I cannot get the strobe to go off. And, you know, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. I get paid. And I couldn't get it. It turned out the camera was not in mechanical shutter. You can't make some of the strobes fire if you're in electronic shutter. So common mistake, but we all make them, and I keep making them, and I keep learning from them. And I keep trying to just, you know, take good pictures. So to rifle through a few more portraits, I love compression, 60 to 600. This one I like just framing it with the prop. Someone else was doing the shoot, and I came in and I like this picture better, just with that framing of the propeller. This is a friend of mine I did just a couple of weeks ago with the Sigma 50, and one little Lume Cube panel down on the bottom. And I just wanted to do something different. I was tired of gray days and rainy days in Oshkosh and wanted to do a cool picture. There are chances you get to fly with people. They give biplane rides all over the country and at air shows. I'm sitting in front of the pilot, and I just looked back at him and thought, I see a picture, and turned around and shot. Same thing with this guy, same airplane or same type, different pilot, Southern Wisconsin. He just did this on the way back with the people he had. It was a beautiful day, and he was just goofing around. You know, this is hangar light. The same with this. This is just inside a hangar with the sun coming in, which is why his eyes are a little squinty and watering there. A little better in this one. And this is just straight side light coming in the hangar. All right, I'm going to go through these quicker unless I don't want to run too far over on time. But cockpits are one of my favorite things too. The 14 to 24 is probably the most versatile because you can go 14 millimeters wide. And they're all 2.8s too, except the 24 millimeter is 1.4. But I like the zooms for the flexibility, but there's something about a prime where you can really blur the background out. Why? Because more flexibility and that separation of the depth of field. My settings, again, I'm sticking to aperture value, still setting my ISO to be hand holdable. In this case, I'm going to have my ISO higher because most cockpits are going to be darker, and I can do a 60th of a second, sometimes slower, but I don't use a tripod. Most cases you can't get a tripod in some of these cockpits, so it has to be hand holdable. And I'm going to try to start maybe f8, could be 5.6, but I need some depth of field in this. 2.8 or wide open in most cases is not going to make your picture look good. This is kind of the standard thing I might do for a magazine. In this case, I have the 24 to 105, and I did put flash in here. And a quick little idea, flash is difficult because it's going to glare off gauges. And in this case, we learned the hard way through the years is if you turn your camera upside down so the flash is below it, then it will tend to fill in this a little better without getting all the glare. So it's interesting trying to compose this with the camera upside down and find the shutter button, but when you can do it, it works pretty good. You know, I love getting close and having one thing in focus and letting the rest of it just drop off. Here's the 24. I love, you know, the controls in focus and the background dropping off so much. I have wondered to throw this out because I'm always trying to learn and do something different, is what if I had done focus stacking on this and focused on each of those knobs? The thing is that I would have needed to be on a tripod and I couldn't. But that's, you know, there's my challenge to maybe this summer try this and see if I can do some focus stacking so that all of those control knobs are sharp. That background is just really blurred out like that. You know, I love getting close, showing, you know, the corroded metal gauge and the texture of the wood. All right, I went over some of this, but extra light is often needed. Watch out for glare, keep as centered as possible. It's hard to do. You think you're centered and you're not, but you get the picture back and look at it and it's all kind of crooked. You can fix that in post-production, but the closer you get, the better it's going to look. And I found that I try to shoot everything in the shade. Sometimes we have to turn the airplane until, especially if it's a high wing, until the shade is over the full panel. But some of the pictures that are hardest to do is when there's a spot of bright sunlight just burning through, and it really becomes a distraction. This is with the 12 to 24, and I love the perspective on this one, with the lens warping it a little, with the control handle and focus and the rest dropping off a little. I like this one even more. This is, I guess you're starting to see some of the things I like, is something in focus in the foreground and the background dropping out. Now here's something, if you're at an air show, you're going to run into people and all sorts of stuff in the way. This is Fifi, it's a B-29 bomber, and I'm thinking that they let you tour it for $10 or something like that. There's another B-29 that's out there that gives tours. And you get up there and it's a cool shot, but when I look out, I'm seeing, you know, airplanes and people and all this distraction. So I went through and painstakingly cut out all the windows, and actually this being the Commemorative Air Force B-29, this was a job for them, and they wanted something looking nice. So I think I started with just blue sky, and then I just started playing around with like a dark moody sky like this. But it's a little something if you want to try something different at an air show or a fly-in, is, you know, you might have a nice picture, but what if you cut the sky out and put something else behind it? And sort of going hand in hand with cockpits are just details, you know, just in this case, just the graphic of the red and white checkerboard on the left and the blue, you know, details of an engine, just things like that. All right, getting into the big one that at least my friends seem to like, with air shows. Again, I'm using those 3 long telephotos, but I'm throwing in the 120 to 300 sport for night air shows. And I'm going to go through these a little quicker, so yell out to Mike or in the chat thing if something comes up. Looking for composition, trying to make a composition that I like with the smoke trails and the airplanes. You know, I'll follow these around with the camera continually, trying to get something that looks really cool in the viewfinder. So my settings, and this is where some things are getting, they're changed a little and they're important. Now I'm in shutter priority, or it can be manual depending on if you would prefer that, but I still prefer to let the camera make some of these decisions. But in most cases, I want to know what that shutter speed is. So propeller aircraft, 1/400th of a second to start with, and then I work down. 1/400th of a second is going to keep the prop not quite frozen. It's got a little blur to it, but I know that most of the plane is going to be in focus, and my percentages of in focus pictures is going to be pretty good. Then I'm going to start working down from there to 320 and 250 and 160. And I don't know that I can handhold personally at 125. I know there are people that are coming up with beautiful airshow pictures at a 60. I mean, it's got to be at a 60th of a second because they have a full circle propeller. I personally can't do it, but you know, it's one of the challenges that they do, and it's something, if you're interested in that, you can do. There are times I do servo autofocus so that it's constantly going to update. And I'll throw in tracking once in a while. I've tried this with Sony, and I'm waiting to try this with Canon, is see how tracking focus is going to work better than me just trying to keep the focus square on the airplane as it goes by. Now, talking about shutter speed in the propeller, this was probably 1/400th of a second. You can see the blades, you can see a little blur there, so it's not too bad. I got a little more blur in this one. You know, and I'm finding that as long as I have the airplane sharp, you know, if I could do that full circle, that would be fine, but these planes are moving around too, so I want to freeze the movement that they have between themselves, not just my shaking as I'm trying to swing the camera around and pan them. And that brings us to tips that with propeller aircraft, you have to pan with the action. Anything that's moving at an air show, generally got to, in the air, you have to pan with it. Lock focus on it and swing along with it. And you know, I practice with cars out in the driveway sometimes just to get what focus thing is going to work the best for me and how well I'm doing on panning. And crop in post-production. I mentioned night air shows. Here's where the 120 to 300 comes in because it's an f2.8. I'm up to 4,000 ISO in this one, and this had a lot of noise. I denoised this in Topaz, but you know, this was pretty bad. This was a little easier. You know, now we're up to 6,400. So moving into jets, which I would say on one hand is easier because you don't have to worry about shutter speed as far as keeping a prop from freezing. So again, shutter priority. Now here's where a minimum of 2,000th of a second, higher if possible. Wider focus point helps sometimes. Tracking focus is an option. And again, I'm in servo. And I say some of this because you don't realize, like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, when they're in formation like this, that's easy to track. But when they come whizzing by you, you can't believe how fast you're turning, trying to keep them in focus, just keep them in the viewfinder. So the wider focus point helps. Faster shutter speed, I think, helps, like even going up to 4,000. Even a shot like this, I I wish I had little videos to show what this looks like, where from a distance, you know, seems like he's moving slower and it gets faster as it comes up to you, and they'll pass you and then they'll start pulling up. And it is really hard just locking focus on them and not having them just go past you. I mentioned back in the beginning of this about you don't always have to be airshow center, way up in front. This is about having a press pass, and it will get you into there. I shot this from the parking lot at Oshkosh. We were getting ready to pack up and didn't realize that the V2 was going to fly by. And this is with the 150-600 Contemporary. And the nice thing is it made the pass to the airshow crowd, and then it banked off to the left, and it's lifting its wings. And it was like the perfect place, the perfect shot. So sometimes what I like to do is maybe not worry about airshow center, but go down to the extremes of the field, go way to the south or way to the north, if I'm at Oshkosh, and see if when they finish one pass and they're about to do a turn and come back, is that going to give me a better shot than everybody's getting up in the center? So whenever you can, experimentation is great. And again, with jet aircraft, pan with the action, just realize it is really fast sometimes. And again, crop in post. And Mike, let me finish this one on this. When I say crop in post, you know, this is, you know, a dramatic shot of the Thunderbirds, but you want to know what it looked like. And this was with a 400 millimeter lens, but they don't let you real close sometimes with the jet teams. It depends on where you're at and what the crowd limitations are. And this is what I got. These, and by the way, these were shot on different days, but so I'm using, you can tell by the sky background, but using this for illustrative purposes. But this is what I got in camera. I had a lot of pictures that looked like this. So, you know, and I see people putting these up on Instagram, and I'm a newspaper photographer, and crop was put into my head because space was tight and you had to give them the major elements. So for me, cropping is a really big deal. And to me, I think it makes a really big difference. Go ahead, Mike.
That's a great shot, by the way. Do you wear ear protection at these air shows?
Sometimes with the jets I do, and I probably should more often.
And somebody asked, somebody gave the hint, the tip. Vinny said the platypods are great for cockpits, by the way.
Good point. And I use them for fireworks too.
Oh, nice. And you answered the question about how to get a good propeller blur by working at 1/400th and kind of working your way down in shutter speed. But he's asking, or Ken's asking, are you still hand holding the camera on those as you get really slow?
Yes. You know, and I'm wondering, again, I'm not a tripod person, but some of the people that are getting this incredible blur, and I haven't contacted them to ask what their secret is, but I'm wondering if they're on a tripod with a gimbal, and it just makes it easier to swing and follow the plane. And they're not shooting it when it's right over top of them where they got to swing it up and the action is the fastest. They're shooting it as it's coming toward you a little bit more. You know, questions I don't have all the answers to.
Yeah. And Dominique asks if, and you're probably familiar with this, if we make a 150-600 that mounts to a Sony 7R3, we don't make a native mount to Sony of the 150-600, but it does work with our MC11. Have you had good experience with the combination?
I have. I've never had an issue with the MC11. Biggest thing is just make sure you keep your firmware updated on the lens and the MC11. And, you know, if I'm shooting, and actually I shot Nikon and Canon lenses with the MC11 on Sony and had, well, I take it back, Nikon would be a comm light adapter, and that has issues depending on the lens. But, you know, I can't say I've had any issues with it.
And do you ever, in a lot of air shows now, the sun is in front of you. What's the best way to handle this? It's a question from Alice.
Good one, and it's too bad they set it up that way. Um, the best thing is see if you can get. You're not going to be able to get. It sounds like to the other side of the air show, so you get the sun to your back. But see if you can get to a location where it just isn't as bad. Or it's too bad they set it up that way, but I've seen it happen, and it's rough. There isn't a good answer outside of shooting silhouettes.
Yeah, good solution right there. Lemonade, make lemons into lemonade. There you go.
Yeah. All right. 2 more sections if you guys have the time. And next one is fireworks. And I love wide angle for this. I have used the 70-200 depending on if I'm farther away, but 14 to 24 is ideal. And that can be like in the Canon EF mount or the DGDN for Sony, or for L mount. The 24 to 70 is still versatile, even though I may use it more at 24 to 35. And I was using the 28, and I just find it incredibly sharp for some of the stuff that I was doing. Manual exposure. This is one where I will really give you, some firm settings. And I got most of this off the internet, and I'm thinking, well, I'll use it as a starter. And it, in most cases, it just works. But ISO 200, F11, I'll start with 6 seconds, and then I'll adjust the shutter speed up and down depending on my exposure and how much the fireworks bursts are streaming down. Or, do I have a nice ball of fireworks? Are they streaming too much? So that's where, you're an artist when it comes to some of this. This is where you get to create. So now I can play with my shutter speed and do different things. And I time it with, I hear them go off, and I'll watch a little bit, and then I'll open the shutter. And a lot of times I will use a cable release. Sometimes I will just hold the camera and just work the shutter with my finger. Here are a few things I've gotten, and all of these are at Oshkosh. Now, one little tip, and I think I'm referring it to this picture, although I may have executed it better or can in the future, is have something in the foreground. And also keep in mind that the finale is going to be brighter. I don't have a picture of that because they all washed out and I deleted them, but the finale is going to have a lot of stuff going up at once, and it's going to be brighter. So you're going to have to maybe up your f-stop a little bit, cut your shutter speed. But I've been disappointed a few times in the finale because it just burned out. This is with a longer lens. This is with a 70-200. I was in a different location for this, farther away, but your lens choice in this case, and I just felt like going vertical from where I was because I was further away. And don't forget that, I had a couple pictures from the night air show. As they're doing this with pyro, you can put your camera on a tripod and do 30-second exposures and get this in the sky as they go through and make a path with all that. Now, let's wrap it up with air to air. And this is, maybe the highest part of aviation photography, because there's some risks to it. You need professional pilots. It helps to have formation training. There's some FAA involvement with some of this, depending on if you're taking a door off an airplane. So it helps to have a pilot that's done this before go to an airport, people that are recognized as good pilots with this, take a seminar or a class someplace in it. And they do give them here and there around the country. Oh, let me go back to my lenses quick. 70-200 sport is the go-to lens. It's just perfect for air to air. I take the 24 to 70 so I can shoot wider if I want to have something with a little environment in it. And as a backup, and I've been using the Sigma 100 to 400, and it is incredibly sharp, and it's very good up until 200. and it doesn't get less sharp from 200 to 400, you get more shaky. Remember, the plane that you're in is moving and the other plane is moving, and there's little turbulence in the air sometimes, and you know, there's vibration from the engine, and it's just almost impossible to hold the 60th of a second at 400 millimeters. At least it is for me. But up until 200 millimeters, you know, I can handhold it without an issue. So almost like with airshow, except the settings are a little different. I'm going to start at 250 because I found that still gives me a little prop twist, but I'm going to have more images are going to be in focus because of that faster shutter speed. Then I will move down to a 60th because that's going to give me that full circle prop blur that everyone seems to be after. Servo autofocus, I also try tracking like the Sony and the Canon R series has. This is what it looks like from my vantage point in one airplane. This is in another, in a little Piper Cub. Notice I'm strapped in. I've got a 5-point harness, so I can't fall out. This was from a flight a couple of years ago with both Sony A9 Mark IIs. It's got the 70 to 200 and the 24 to 70. And I just shot last week, and I was using the R6 with the 100 to 400 and got some beautiful results for a really cloudy day. This is what it looks like in formation. The little silver plane below is the subject. And you can, if you look in through the window, you can see that the baggage door is off, and that's what I'm shooting out of because we don't want to shoot through glass. It's going to distort the image, and usually it's going to have a color tint to it. So we want to shoot through air all the time. And this is what a photo mission looks like. Somebody sent me this after a mission that we had, and their GPS prints this out. So you can see how we go out and gain altitude, we do circles, we're out over the water, and then we come in. I'm working from like right to left, and we do some things over the land. We go out over the lake. I like lakes because I'll show you a little bit later, but it's usually a little calmer, but it's just cleaner to shoot over. And we do a little of that. We go out over some swampland. We come back and do another circle and another circle, and then we work our way back. And a flight usually lasts, once we meet up, it's like 20 minutes, 30 minutes tops. And just going through some air-to-air pictures. This is with the 24 to 105. The client wanted something that gave the idea of, they wanted the tropical water and the boats and the feeling that you were in Florida and the Keys. $7,200 is just, I mean, it's incredibly sharp. You know, out over the water. I love the clean background on something like this. And the next one, I only had the lens was in my plane or in the plane for another reason, lens and camera. But this is with the 60 to 600, and it is just incredibly sharp. It's hard to believe that it could be shot. I think it's close to, or just a little over 300 millimeters. All right, tips on air-to-air. And this goes with a lot of aviation pictures, including air show with planes flying by you. It's all about the percentages. You are only going to get a small percentage in focus. If someone says, oh, I got, you know, everything was in focus on an air-to-air mission, I'm not sure I believe them because it just doesn't work that way. Don't worry about the ones you have to delete. Only the good ones count. And a little tip of mine that I don't tell a lot of people, and I've just decided that, you know, some of these tips I'm going to start sharing. I keep the subject plane below the horizon. And you'll notice, except for that tight shot before, below the horizon, below the horizon, below the horizon. The colors seem richer. You don't get a lot of haze and things like that. Again, crop is needed in post-production. safety, and I didn't have my initial slide in here, but safety is the initial thing that you always want to keep in mind with this. So rather than, some of these planes look like they're right up in your face, but I'm using a telephoto lens. So that is pulling them in a little tighter, and I'm cropping. Just a example of shutter speed. This is 1/400th of a second. And that's a 80th. So you can see the difference of what it makes from an artistic standpoint. If you're a pilot, I think it looks nicer full circle, and most aviation photographers are going to say it has to be full circle. Something a little different, trying primes when we came out with the 85mm lens last year. Just incredibly sharp for something like this. And to give you another perspective, this was shot, actually the next one you're going to see is shot with the 100 to 400, but they just sent me this picture about a month ago that, hey, do you remember this? And it was one of the best flights that I've had, and this is what I ended up with. This is my view of that airplane, and that's with the 100 to 400. Now, I was talking about I don't like to show the horizon. And this kind of goes along with the question of what if you're at an air show and the sun's on the wrong side, is you're going to get pictures that are, look like this. And this was a terrible day, but we had the flight planned and thought we'd just go for fun and use it as a training flight. But I don't like to show that horizon line just because it's, you see the haze, you see the clutter. It just doesn't work for me. I find this a lot better. Same airplane as was on the top, but put them down with a lake below, and it's cleaner, and I just have more color saturation. The same with, we were flying over the city, and there are times, I don't like clutter in the background, even if I'm over the land. In this case, I tried to slow the shutter speed down to blur it out and see if that would help, but I don't like clutter. I would rather have that clean picture over the water or over a totally green field. And just like, I got a couple more, Mike. You want to jump in now, or?
Yeah, a couple questions. One common question is, could you talk about ND filters or polarizers you might use? Someone asked, if you are really shooting on a bright day, do you opt to use a polarizer, or do you really close down your aperture? What's your preferred method?
Good point. And something that is always on my list to try, but what I found as, I want to say, a working photographer, when we set up a shoot, there's a lot of, like a commercial one, there's a lot of money involved and it has to be done. We've got weather windows and all of this. So I tend to go what works with me, what has worked in the past, and what I know is going to work. And once that's all done, I'll experiment. And most of the time, there isn't time to experiment. So that said, I don't use filters, even in bright sunlight. I can shoot at a 60th of a second. Now, one is I'm not necessarily going to shoot at high noon. We try to shoot early in the morning, later in the afternoon and evening. So I don't have that intense brightness. But if I had to shoot at noon, I'd take them above the clouds if possible, because it just looks nicer up there then. But I'll shoot at a 60th if I have to at ISO 100 or 50, and I think it ends up topping out at f/22 or something like that. And I've done that, and it works. And whoever brought up the ND filter, I'm not so, and maybe that's what their point was. I'm not so worried about cutting the light down as does diffraction. Does that affect it at f/22 when I'm shooting? And I don't know. I've talked this over with a few other people, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like, it makes sense technically that you might get a slightly softer picture at f/22 because of that. So if I put an ND filter on and get my f-stop back down to f8 or 11, is that going to be better? And it's very possible it is going to be better, but I just haven't had the chance to try it.
This is kind of a random one, but on the air-to-air show with the formation of 4 to 5 planes together, what lens and f-stop were you using? I don't know if you can remember that. And if that did you recall that air-to-air when you had 4 or 5 planes at one? And are you using a large f-stop? Are you using a closed-down f-stop on that one? Kind of earlier question, if that's too.
Yes, a wide angle lens is going to help because you're probably going to be one is I'm not going to shoot at a 60th of a second if unless the light is just absolutely beautiful. And you're seeing full crop circles. I'm going to bump up the shutter speed a little bit because I don't know if I'm showing up to everybody, but in formation, all the planes are doing this. There's always these slight little movements that they have. So multiply that by 4. And then the last person in a formation he's in the bad position of really having to control his throttle to keep up and stay in position. So people are going all over the place. So you kind of wait until they kind of settle in to a good spot and you shoot a burst, and then you'll see one kind of fall off a little bit. This is like a work in progress. I mean, you're watching all these little ducks come together in formation, and then all of a sudden they're all over again. So a little bit faster shutter speed and, F11, something that's going to give you some depth of field.
And someone said that they always were told you should try to show the whole plane. And I noticed on a lot of them, you crop out the tail or the wings. What's your view on that? Or do you have an approach to the way you crop?
No, and that's perfect. And when I started at EAA, the thinking from a lot of aviation enthusiasts, they want to see the whole plane. And what you're seeing are the ones in this presentation that I like, and I'm trying to illustrate something. But if I'm shooting for a client, they are going to see a picture like the one that's on the screen, but they're going to see it so they see all the wingtips. They're going to see it totally sideways so you can see the shape of the airplane from the side. They're going to see, a down shot. They're going to see a lot of different views, and not most, but there will be pictures that show all the wing and tail and everything in it. And then there are going to be these tight dramatic pictures. So I'm going to shoot all of that, and they have all of that to pick from. I personally like the tighter, more dramatic in your face kind of picture, and that's just my style. So, I think that answers it. The thing is to shoot all of it, and you can always crop. But I don't know. It's just my style. I like to be tight.
And everybody's saying thank you. This has been a really interesting presentation. I don't want to cut you off, but that was the last question. And some people are saying that they're going to be seeing you. They're going to be going to their next show on the 26th and applying a lot of these methods you've dropped on everyone here today.
Okay, I'm at the end of this. I just want to, this is even with the 18 to 300.
Wow.
As much as I like our high-end lenses, you can make this work. And this organization, I was one of the charter members. They will have, training sessions around the country and have people that give, work. What do I want to say? Classes in actual air-to-air stuff. So there are resources out there that can do it safely.
Thank you. That is awesome. Everybody's in the chat really loving what you showed today, and from all over the world, they're saying stuff. And this has been really informative and great images and great presentation, and a lot